Welcome back to CEEN Caribbean News. It's now time to go in depth. Vigorous campaigning from the Trinidad and Tobago's major political parties came to a crescendo on Monday, September 7 with general elections. The battle for office was between the People's Partnership Coalition, headed by Kamla Prasad-Bisesa, and the Dr. Keith Rowley-led People's National Movement, PNM. When the smoke cleared Monday evening, Dr. Keith Rowley was declared the victor. On Wednesday afternoon, he was officially sworn in as the new Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, to get an update on what has been happening in the country since Monday night's big reveal, we have been joined by pollster and Director of Cadres, Peter Wickham. Welcome back to Indepth, Mr. Wickham.
Hey, good evening. Good evening, Jamaica. Good to be with you.
Now, first of all, congratulations on successfully predicting the outcome of the general elections.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think it was a good call in this instance, and I was happy that things worked out. Yeah.
Oh, great. Now, what does a new government under the rule of the People's National Movement likely mean for the people of Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, well, I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is very familiar with the PNM, so I think for them it's kind of business as usual. Trinidad and Tobago is somewhat unlike Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean, where it's a country where they've known the rule of a single government for the longest period of time, and the PNM would have been in power for most of their independence years. So it is not an unfamiliar situation. What is unfamiliar is the new Prime Minister, because they would have never have experienced him before. Patrick Manning is now history. He's no longer even a member of Parliament. So I think that would be the new thing, settling into a new Parliament with a new leader. Keith Rowley is well known to Trinidadians. He is a Tobagonian, like the previous Prime Minister that they had, but he has historically always been a senior minister, and I think that they will be now experiencing a slightly different type of leadership, perhaps a bit more administrative than Patrick Manning was. And I think it should be an interesting time for them, but they're very familiar with the PNM in Trinidad.
Okay. Since Monday's elections, everything seemed to be following the correct order in the Twin Island Republic, until news broke that the swearing in of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley had to be redone. Do you know what was the cause of that?
Yeah, well, I think this was probably a misunderstanding on the part of the President regarding the priority with which swearing should take place. Quite frankly, I'm not a little surprised, because the President is himself an attorney and indeed was a judge. One would think that he would not make a mistake like that, and certainly he has a ton of advisors who would advise him in terms of the way that things should be done. But for one reason or another, they got the order mixed up and they had to repeat it. But of course, I was reminded that the same thing happened with President Obama when he was sworn in himself. So it's not as though even the great President of the United States is not immune from making mistakes like that. They seem to have redone it. They got it right. It was a bit of a faux pas, but they're off to a start. Slightly less smooth than they would like, but also start nonetheless.
Former Prime Minister Kamla Prasad-Bisesa has called for a recount of the votes. Is it likely that the results would be different?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a recount. She's basically taken the matter to court, where she's challenging the entire outcome. I would like to think that the court is not going to touch that result. Courts in the region have been hard-pressed to touch results of individual elections. We do have a precedent in Antigua, Barbuda, where a similar thing happened. The time of the time of the voting was extended. The court didn't get involved in that either, and I do feel that her initiative on this time around was ill-advised. She's indicated that even if she's not successful, it will be useful to have a declaratory position on what was done by the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But the general sense is that it is perhaps an initiative on her part to save some face in light of the fact that this will not be the fifth election that she's lost. I wasn't aware of recounts, though. It's possible that they may be done in individual marginal constituencies, but it's unlikely that that's going to change anything, because the margins in Trinidad, like Jamaica, are generally too large for a mistake of that magnitude to have been made to warrant to change the outcome.
Okay, now let's say for argument's sake those results changed, the ones that she would get to recount. Let's say for argument's sake those change. With the Prime Minister already being sworn in, what would be the likely course of action to follow?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there's about five, there's a majority of five, so she would have to have recounts in 5 places and 5 victories. As I said, that's highly unlikely. I wasn't even aware that she had actually pursued them. But certainly, if the court action is successful and the court says that the election is null and void, Caretaker government automatically is in place, which would be the government that's in place now, and I imagine that they would go back to the polls and vote for a new government. But this current government that's in office would remain in office. You would recall a few years ago there was a situation with a dead heat where the president was given the power, more or less, to swear in the person that he thought was appropriate. He swore in Patrick Manning on agreement with Basil Pandey, which was against the convention, but nonetheless he did that. And even though there was a new election ordered, Patrick Manning remained in office for the better part of a year and was given the opportunity to try to form a government. So if we use that as a precedent, the assumption is that if the court did send this result back, the PNN would remain in office, at least in the short term. As I said, though, I'm hard pressed to see the court sending this result back, because it would be very, very unprecedented.
Okay. Now, the current president, Anthony Carmona, is believed to be aligned with the United National Congress, having been appointed by the party when it took control of office. Do you think the new government will allow him to finish his term, or will they be more inclined to replace him with someone in their favor?
Yeah, well, that's a useful question, because the way that Trinidad and Tobago does it is very hard to replace the president. There was an attempt to replace A.N.R. Robinson before. You need to have the cooperation of both houses. The president is actually elected by an electoral college. While the government does have a large say in it, the electoral college has to have the cooperation. And with Parliament constructed in the way that it is, with a slim margin of 5, it would be difficult to remove the president without the cooperation of the opposition. And the presumption is that the opposition is not going to cooperate. Having said that, however, he is a former judge, and while he was appointed by the UNC, he's seen as a person who can comfortably work with both sides. When his 3-year contract is ended, the presumption is that it won't be renewed. It won't be the first time a president has only served one term and not been renewed. But I would imagine that the PNM would want to have a president that is they're slightly more comfortable with. But the useful thing about their system compared to what we have in Jamaica, what we have in Barbados, is that the Prime Minister doesn't just choose the person has to go through a process of election by Parliament, and it resembles in some way a constitutional change, so it does require the opposition to cooperate to some extent.
Faris Al-Rawi has been appointed Attorney General. Retired Major Edmund Dillon is the new Minister of National Security, and an unnamed Minister of Finance is slated to take his oath of office on Friday. Has that minister's name been revealed?
No, I haven't heard anything about it, but I understand that it is a leader in the business sector, perhaps associated with a bank or some other leading business. They're saying there's some legal issues regarding his, I guess he would have to resign his current post, and he would resign his directorship before he is presumed. I've heard it's a man. I haven't heard anything further than that. It's interesting that it will be the second time in recent history that the PNM has placed the Ministry of Finance in the hands of someone who is not a member of Parliament. This was done under Brian Quaitong, I believe, as Minister of Finance. And this was done back in Patrick Manning's era, back in Basil Pandey's era. So you now have both the UNC and the PNM taking a decision to place the Ministry of Finance in the hands of a financial expert, so to speak, and outside of any of the elected members of Parliament, which is consistent with Rowley's stated policy, but nonetheless an interesting move to make in the context of a region where we tend to associate the Ministry of Finance with an elected MP.
Have you any inclination of who the other ministers might be?
Well, not really. Keith Rowley, in one of his initiatives, he suggested that he was going to place a lot of the policy implementation in the hands of ministers who were not members of Parliament. So yes, Faris Al-Rawi, the Attorney General, he's a member of Parliament, but he did indicate that he wanted the members of Parliament to become more involved in supervising the work of ministers. So the feeling is that based on that, he will probably look towards professionals in various fields to come in and serve the government, and then he would enhance the role of members of Parliament in relation to supervising them. It's a very, very different way. It's almost Republican in its nature, but we see how that goes. But he hasn't been saying a lot about which other ministers will be involved. He's indicated that Clarence Rambarat, who was an unsuccessful bid for the Niara seat against Gypsy Chaitan, he would likely be Minister of Agriculture. But those are the only hints that he's given in terms of what he plans to do.
Okay, now finally, Jack Warner has resigned from his Independent Liberal Party. What does that translate to for the future of the party?
Yeah, well, I mean, the party was all about Jack's money, Jack's party, and also Jack's cause. Now he's gone. I imagine that the party will probably amble on for a short space of time, and then it will go the way of all other small political parties that have emerged for reasons that are not transparent and overwhelming. I mean, it was really his cause, and he financed it, he set it up, he ran it, and I think that now he's no longer there. It will probably dissipate. But he's achieved his objective, and I think he pretty much said that. He's achieved his objective of removing Kamala Persad from office. He is convinced that she will not re-emerge at any point in time soon. And I think he's quite happy sailing off into the sunset with that knowledge in mind.
Thank you very much for speaking with us, Mr. Wickham.
My pleasure. Good chatting with you. All the best.
Thank you. We were just joined by political analyst Peter Wickham to discuss the aftermath of elections in Trinidad and Tobago.